The rain battered Seattle's streets. But inside the cozy warmth of the Bean Haven, Jamie felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. His dad's old friend, Ethan, sat across from him, his steel-gray eyes lingering a beat too long, heavy with something unspoken. Jamie's heart tripped over itself. He'd known Ethan since he was a kid. But tonight, that familiar gaze felt like a spark ready to ignite a wildfire. At 22, Jamie Carter was still figuring himself out. Raised in a small, conservative suburb of Tacoma, he'd spent years dodging questions about who he was, what he wanted, and why he hadn't brought a girlfriend home. His dad, Mark, a gruff but loving mechanic, never pushed. But Jamie felt the weight of expectation every time his father mentioned settling down. Jamie had come out to himself 2 years ago, in the quiet of his dorm room at the University of Washington. But saying it out loud, that was a bridge he hadn't crossed. Not yet. Ethan Harper, 40, was a ghost from his dad's pasta former bandmate who drifted out of their lives after Mark got married and Ethan moved to Portland. Jamie remembered him from childhood summers, Ethan's easy laugh, the way he'd strum a guitar on their back porch, his wild stories about life on the road. But the Ethan sitting across from him now was different. Leaner, quieter, with lines etched into his face that told stories of their own. He'd shown up at Mark's auto shop last week, back in town for reasons he hadn't fully explained. And when Mark invited him to dinner, Ethan's eyes had found Jamie's sand lingered. "You're not the kid I remember," Ethan said now, his voice low, almost drowned out by the cafe's hum. He stirred his black coffee, the spoon clinking softly. "You've got this, firing you. Like you're about to take on the world." Jamie laughed, nervous, his fingers twisting the edge of his flannel sleeve. "Yeah. I feel more like I'm running from it." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the rain, or the way Ethan's gaze made him feel seen in a way he wasn't used to. Exposed, but not afraid. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Running's okay. As long as you know where you're headed." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Jamie couldn't quite grasp. He wanted to ask what Ethan meant, but his phone buzzed his dad, checking if he was still meeting them at the diner later. Jamie typed a quick reply, his mind still on Ethan's eyes. He'd always thought of Ethan as family, almost an uncle. So why did his chest tighten every time Ethan smiled? They'd ended up at the Bean Haven by chance, after Mark got held up at the shop and suggested Jamie and Ethan grab coffee to catch up. It was supposed to be casual, a quick drink before dinner. But the air between them crackled, and Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, something big. "Tell me about you," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Not the kid I knew. The guy sitting here now." Jamie hesitated. Where did he even start? The art classes he loved, but kept secret from his dad. The nights he spent scrolling through forums, reading about other guys like him, too scared to take the leap. Or the way he'd always felt different, like he was carrying a secret he didn't fully understand himself. "I'm figuring it out," he said finally. "College, life, all of it. Dad wants me to get a real job, but I don't know if that's me." Ethan nodded, like he understood more than Jamie was saying. "Your dad's a good guy, but he's always seen the world in straight lines. You're more like a melody. You've got your own rhythm." Jamie's breath caught. No one had ever described him like that. He wanted to lean into the words, to let them wrap around him like a warm blanket. But fear crept in, too. What was he doing, letting himself feel this way about Ethan? His dad's friend. A man twice his age. A man who probably didn't even. "You okay?" Ethan's voice cut through his thoughts, soft but steady. Yeah, Jamie lied, forcing a smile. Just thinking. Ethan didn't push, but his eyes stayed on Jamie, searching. The cafe's lights dimmed as the barista flipped a switch, signaling closing time. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city glowed under a blanket of mist. Jamie didn't want to leave. Not yet. Come on, Ethan said, standing and tossing a few bills on the table. Let's walk. Get some air before we meet your dad. They stepped into the cool night, the streets slick and reflective. Jamie zipped up his jacket, stealing glances at Ethan as they walked toward the diner. Ethan's hands were stuffed in his pockets, his leather jacket worn but stylish, his stride easy but purposeful. Jamie wondered what had brought him back to Seattle. Why now? And why did it feel like Ethan was carrying a weight he wasn't ready to share? They passed a street performer strumming a guitar, the notes floating through the air like a challenge. Ethan slowed, his expression softening. Used to be me, he said quietly. Playing for tips, chasing dreams. Thought I'd be a rock star by now. Jamie grinned. You're not doing too bad. Dad says you've got a music shop in Portland. That's pretty cool. Ethan's smile was bittersweet. It's a living. But it's not the same as being out there. You know. Feeling alive. Jamie nodded, though he wasn't sure he did know. He wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of Ethan's story, but they'd reached the diner. Through the window, he could see his dad at a booth, waving them in. Jamie's stomach twisted. Whatever was happening between him and Ethan, it had to wait. For now. Inside, Mark greeted them with a grin, oblivious to the undercurrent between his son and his old friend. About time. Thought you two got lost in that hipster coffee shop. Ethan laughed, sliding into the booth. Just catching up. Your kid's got a lot to say. Jamie's cheeks burned, but he forced himself to sit, to act normal. Dinner passed in a blur of small talk and greasy fries. But every time Ethan's knee brushed his under the table, Jamie's pulse spiked. He told himself it was nothing. Just his imagination. But when Ethan offered to drive him home, and their eyes met again in the diner's dim light, Jamie knew he was in trouble. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. A melody. Your own rhythm. For the first time, he wondered if he could be brave enough to live that truth. To be the person he'd always hidden. But what would it cost? His dad. His family. And what did Ethan want from him, if anything at all? Sleep didn't come easy. Jamie stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the night. Every look. Every word. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. The next morning, Jamie woke to the sound of his dad clanging tools in the garage. The memory of Ethan's gaze hit him like a freight train, and he buried his face in his pillow, trying to make sense of it. Was he reading too much into it? Or had Ethan felt it too, that electric pull, like a song they both knew but hadn't played yet? He dragged himself to the kitchen, where his dad was already sipping coffee, grease smudged on his knuckles. You and Ethan hit it off last night, Mark said, not looking up from his newspaper. He was asking about you. Said you've got potential. Jamie's heart skipped. Potential for what? Mark shrugged. Dunno. Music. Maybe. He's always been into that artsy stuff. Said he might have a job for you at his shop if you're interested. A job? With Ethan? Jamie's mind raced. He mumbled something about thinking it over and grabbed his sketchbook, heading to the park to clear his head. The crisp autumn air helped, but every stroke of his pencil brought him back to Ethan, his voice. his hands, the way he seemed to see right through Jamie's defenses. By noon, he couldn't resist. He texted Ethan, keeping it casual. "Hey, Dad mentioned a job. What's that about?" The reply came fast. "Come by the shop this afternoon. I'm in town for a bit. We'll talk." Ethan's temporary setup was a small music store in Capitol Hill, a pop-up he was running while he sorted out his plans. The shop was a chaotic blend of vinyl records, guitars, and old posters, with a faint smell of cedar and leather. When Jamie walked in, Ethan was tuning a guitar, his fingers moving with a quiet confidence that made Jamie's throat tight. "Glad you came," Ethan said, setting the guitar down. His smile was warm but guarded, like he was holding something back. "Your dad's right, you've got something special. I could use someone like you here. Someone who gets it." "Gets what?" Jamie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that Jamie could smell his cologne woodsy. "Grounding. The way music feels. The way life feels when you're not afraid to be yourself." Jamie's pulse hammered. He wanted to ask what Ethan meant, to demand clarity, but fear stopped him. Instead, he nodded, pretending to inspect a stack of records. "So, what's the job?" "Helping out. Mostly. Inventory. Sales. Maybe some social media stuff." "You're young. You know how that works." Ethan paused, then added, "And maybe figuring out who you are along the way." The words hit Jamie like a punch. He wanted to tell Ethan everything, how he'd spent years hiding, how he was terrified of disappointing his dad, how he didn't even know where to start being himself. But all he managed was, "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Ethan's hand brushed his shoulder, a fleeting touch that sent sparks through Jamie's veins. "You don't have to be ready. Just don't run from it." They spent the afternoon working side by side, sorting records and joking about Ethan's old band days. Jamie felt lighter than he had in years, like he could breathe for the first time. But every time their hands brushed or their eyes met, the air thickened, and Jamie wondered how long he could keep pretending this was just a job. That night, Ethan invited him to a local open mic at a bar nearby. "You don't have to perform," he said. "Just come. Feel the vibe." Jamie agreed, telling himself it was no big deal. But when they arrived, the bar was packed, the stage lit with soft amber lights, and Ethan was different, alive, like he'd slipped back into his younger self. He took the stage, guitar in hand, and played a song he'd written years ago, his voice rough and raw, singing about love and loss and roads not taken. Jamie watched, mesmerized, as Ethan poured his heart into the music. The lyrics spoke of longing, of choices made and regretted, and Jamie felt like they were written for him. When Ethan finished, the crowd cheered, but his eyes found Jamie's, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. After the set, they grabbed beers and sat in a quiet corner. "That was incredible," Jamie said, his voice shaky. "You're incredible." Ethan looked down, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I used to think I could outrun who I was. Thought if I kept moving, kept playing, I wouldn't have to face it. But it catches up." "Face what?" Jamie asked, his heart pounding. Ethan's eyes met his, raw and unguarded. "That I'm not the guy everyone thinks I am. That I've been hiding, too." The confession hung between them, heavy and fragile. Jamie wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but fear held him back. Instead, he asked, "Why'd you come back to Seattle?" Ethan hesitated, then said, "I needed to figure out what I left behind. And I think I found it." Jamie's breath hitched. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded, letting the moment stretch. They stayed until the bar closed, talking about everything and nothing: music, dreams, the way the city felt alive at night. When Ethan drove him home, the silence between them was charged, like a storm waiting to break. As Jamie climbed out of the car, Ethan said, "Come back to the shop tomorrow. We've got more to talk about." Jamie nodded, his heart racing. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing: he wasn't running anymore. The next day, Jamie woke with Ethan's words echoing in his head, "I've been hiding, too." What did that mean? Had Ethan been carrying a secret all these years, just like Jamie? The thought made his chest ache with a mix of hope and fear. He wanted to know more, but he was terrified of what it might mean for him, for Ethan, for his dad. At the shop, Ethan was quieter than usual, focused on restringing a guitar. Jamie busied himself with inventory, stealing glances whenever he could. Ethan's hands moved with precision, but there was a tension in his shoulders, like he was bracing for something. Finally, Jamie couldn't take it anymore. "What did you mean last night?" he blurted out. "About hiding." Ethan froze, then set the guitar down. He looked at Jamie, his expression unreadable. "You really want to know?" Jamie nodded, his throat tight. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've spent my whole life running from who I am. Back when I was in the band with your dad, I was in love with someone. A guy. But I couldn't say it. Not then. Not in that world." Jamie's heart stopped. He'd suspected, hoped, but hearing it out loud was different. "What happened?" He moved on. "I didn't." Ethan's voice was raw, like the words hurt to say. "I left Seattle. Thought I could start over. But you don't outrun yourself. And when I saw you again, it brought it all back." Jamie's mind reeled. Ethan was gay. Or bi? Or something. And the way he was looking at Jamie now, with that same intensity from the cafe, made it clear this wasn't just about the past. It was about them. Now. "I don't know what to say," Jamie admitted, his voice shaking. I think but I've never said it out loud." Ethan's expression softened. "You don't have to say anything. Just know you're not alone." The words cracked something open in Jamie. He wanted to tell Ethan everything: how he'd known he was different since high school, how he'd buried it under layers of denial, how he was terrified of losing his dad's love. But before he could speak, the shop door jingled, and a customer walked in. The rest of the day was a blur of small talk and sales, but the air between them was different now. Charged. Fragile. When the shop closed, Ethan locked the door and turned to Jamie. "You want to get out of here? Somewhere we can talk." They ended up at a quiet pier overlooking Puget Sound, the water dark and endless under the evening sky. Jamie leaned against the railing, his hands gripping the cold metal. "I've never told anyone," he said finally. "Not my dad. Not my friends. I'm scared they'll look at me differently." Ethan stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "They might. Some will. But the ones who matter, they'll love you anyway." Jamie turned to him, their faces inches apart. "What about you? Do you look at me differently?" Ethan's breath hitched. "Yeah. But not the way you think. I see you, Jamie. The real you. And it's beautiful." The world tilted. Jamie's heart pounded so loud he was sure Ethan could hear it. He wanted to close the distance, to kiss him, to see what it felt like to be himself, fully, for the first time. But fear held him back. What if this ruined everything? Ethan seemed to sense his hesitation. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said softly. "But I'm here. When you're ready." They stood there for a long time, the sound of the waves filling the silence. Jamie felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to step back. The next few days were a whirlwind. Jamie threw himself into work at the shop, partly to be near Ethan, partly to avoid his own thoughts. But every moment with Ethan felt like a step toward something bigger. They talked about everything: music, dreams, the lives they wanted but hadn't dared to chase. Ethan told him about his years in Portland, the relationships that never quite worked, the music he still wrote but didn't share. Jamie opened up about his art, showing Ethan sketches he'd never shown anyone. Ethan's praise was quiet but genuine, and it made Jamie feel seen in a way he'd never known. But the weight of his secret grew heavier. He knew he had to tell his dad, but the thought made him sick. Mark was a good man, but he came from a world where different wasn't always accepted. What if he couldn't handle it? What if he blamed Ethan? One night, after closing the shop, Ethan invited Jamie to his apartment for dinner. It was a small place, cluttered with records and books, a guitar propped in the corner. Ethan cooked pasta, and they ate on the couch, laughing over old stories about Mark's band days. But as the night wore on, the air grew heavy again. "Jamie," Ethan said, setting his plate down, "I need to be honest. I'm feeling something here, and I think you are too. But I'm your dad's friend. I'm older. I don't want to mess this up for you." Jamie's heart raced. "You're not messing anything up. I want this. Whatever it is." Ethan's eyes searched his, and for a moment, Jamie thought he might pull away. But then Ethan leaned in, and their lips met, soft, tentative, then hungry. Jamie's world exploded with color, with feeling, with the certainty that this was right. This was him. When they pulled apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against Jamie's. "We take this slow, okay? For both our sakes." Jamie nodded, his heart soaring. For the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The kiss changed everything. Jamie woke the next morning feeling like he'd stepped into a new life, one where he could finally be himself. But with that freedom came fear. He was falling for a Than. The thought of telling his dad loomed like a storm on the horizon. He and Ethan spent every spare moment together, stealing kisses in the back of the shop, talking late into the night about their hopes and fears. Ethan was careful, always checking in, making sure Jamie felt safe. But the more they connected, the more Jamie realized he couldn't keep this from his dad. Not if he wanted to live honestly. One evening, Jamie sat Mark down in their living room. His hands shook as he gripped his coffee mug, the words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times stuck in his throat. Mark sensed something was wrong, his brow furrowing. "What's going on, kid? You look like you're about to confess to a crime." Jamie took a deep breath. "Dad, I'm gay." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mark's face went blank, then tight, like he was processing a language he didn't speak. "Gay?" he repeated, as if testing the word. "You sure?" Jamie nodded, his heart pounding. "I've known for a while. I didn't know how to tell you." Mark leaned back, rubbing his face. "This is a lot. I don't know what to say. Jamie, I love you. You know that. But this isn't what I expected." The words stung, but Jamie pressed on. There's more. I'm seeing someone. Ethan. Mark's eyes widened, then narrowed. Ethan. My Ethan. My friend Ethan. Jamie nodded, bracing himself. Mark stood, pacing the room. Jesus. Jamie. He's twice your age. He's known you since you were a kid. What the hell is he thinking? It's not like that, Jamie said, his voice rising. It's real, Dad. I care about him. He cares about me. Mark stopped, his face a mix of anger and confusion. I need time. Okay. I need to think. The next day, Mark confronted Ethan at the shop. Jamie wasn't there, but Ethan told him later how it went. Mark's voice loud, accusing, hurt. You're supposed to be my friend, Mark had said. How could you do this? Ethan didn't back down. I love him, Mark. I didn't plan this, but it's real. And he deserves to be happy. Mark left without another word, and Jamie felt the weight of his dad's silence like a physical thing. He wanted to fix it, to make Mark understand, but he didn't know how. Ethan was his anchor, holding him steady through the storm. But even Ethan couldn't erase the fear that Jamie had broken something that couldn't be fixed. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's silence grew heavier. Jamie threw himself into the shop, into Ethan, into the life he was building. But every unanswered call, every avoided glance from his dad, was a reminder of what he stood to lose. One night, Ethan took Jamie to a local pride event, a small gathering in a community center. Jamie had never been to anything like it. Rainbow flags, laughter, people who looked like they'd fought the same battles he was fighting. Ethan held his hand, and for the first time, Jamie felt like he belonged somewhere. But even there, he couldn't shake the ache of his dad's absence. I want him to understand, Jamie told Ethan later, curled up on his couch. I want him to be okay with this. With us. Ethan kissed his forehead. He will. He just needs time. Your dad loves you. That's not going anywhere. But time didn't seem to help. Mark stayed distant, and Jamie started to wonder if he'd made a mistake. Not in loving Ethan that felt more right every day, but in telling the truth. Maybe some secrets were better kept. Then, one rainy afternoon, Mark showed up at the shop. Jamie was alone, sorting records, when his dad walked in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, Mark said. Jamie braced himself, expecting another fight. But Mark's voice was softer this time. I've been thinking. A lot. About you. About Ethan. About everything. I don't get it, Jamie. I don't understand this part of you. But I'm trying. And I don't want to lose you. Tears stung Jamie's eyes. I don't want to lose you either, Dad. Mark pulled him into a hug, awkward but fierce. I'm not saying I'm okay with everything. Ethan still. It's weird. Okay. But you're my kid. That comes first. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jamie felt a weight lift, like he could breathe again. He knew it would take time for Mark to fully accept him, to accept Ethan, but for the first time, he felt hope. That night, he told Ethan what happened, and Ethan's smile was brighter than the Seattle skyline. Told you he'd come around, Ethan said, pulling Jamie close. Jamie laughed, his heart full. Yeah, but I'm still scared. Good, Ethan said. Means you're alive. The months that followed were a dance of healing and growth. Jamie and Ethan built their relationship slowly, navigating the complexities of age, history, and family. Mark was trying, But it wasn't easy. Dinners were awkward at first, with stilted conversation and long silences. But over time, Mark started asking questions about Ethan's music, about Jamie's art, about who they were together. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was progress. Jamie started painting again, pouring his emotions onto canvas. Ethan hung one of his pieces in the shop, a vibrant abstract that captured the chaos and beauty of their journey. Customers loved it, and soon Jamie was selling his work, his confidence growing with every piece. Ethan, too, was changing. He started playing open mics again, his music rawer, truer than it had been in years. Jamie watched him perform, his heart swelling with pride. They were building something together, not just a relationship, but a life. A melody, as Ethan had once called it. One evening, as spring bloomed across Seattle, Jamie and Ethan sat on the pier where they'd first opened up to each other. The water sparkled under the setting sun, and Jamie felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. "I was so scared," he admitted, his head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "I thought I'd lose everything if I was honest. My dad, my home, you." Ethan kissed his temple. "You're braver than you think. And you've got me. Always." Jamie smiled, tears in his eyes. "I love you." "I love you too," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. They sat there as the sky turned to fire, the city alive around them. Jamie thought about the boy he'd been, hiding in his room, afraid of his own heart. He wasn't that boy anymore. He was Jamie Carter, artist, lover, Sona man who'd found his rhythm. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more conversations with Mark, more moments of doubt, more battles to fight. But Jamie wasn't alone anymore. He had Ethan, his dad, and a community that was starting to feel like home. That night, as they walked back to Ethan's apartment, hand in hand, Jamie realized something. He'd spent so long running from himself. But in the end, it was facing his truth that set him free. The world hadn't ended when he said the words. It had opened up. And as they stepped into the warm light of Ethan's place, Jamie knew whatever came next, he was ready. Because he wasn't just Mark's son, or Ethan's partner, or the kid who'd been afraid for so long. He was himself. And that was enough.